I wasn't supposed to be there for more than 5 minutes. That's what I told myself as I stood outside her door, the file pressed lightly against my chest like it somehow steadied me. It was already evening, the kind where the sky had turned a deep shade of blue, and the streetlights had just begun to glow. Her house stood quieter than I expected, tucked away from the noise of the city, almost distant. I checked the file again, even though I knew everything inside was exactly where it should be. It wasn't the documents making me hesitate. It was her. At the office, she was always composed. Precise. The kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. People listened when she spoke, not out of fear, but respect. Even I did. Maybe especially me. I pressed the doorbell. For a moment, nothing happened. Then footsteps, soft, unhurried. The door opened. And somehow, she felt different. She wasn't dressed like she usually was at work. No sharp blazer, no structured lines. Instead, something softer, more relaxed. It didn't make her any less commanding. If anything, it made it harder to look away. Like I was seeing a version of her I wasn't meant to. "Oh," she said, her voice quieter than usual, but no less steady. "You came." I nodded, suddenly aware of how formal I felt standing there. "You asked for the files?" A small pause. Her eyes moved from the file to me. Not quickly. Not casually. Slowly. "Right," she said, stepping aside. "Come in." I hesitated for just a second before crossing the threshold. The air inside was warm. Faintly scented, something subtle, something that lingered without overwhelming. It didn't feel like an office space at all. It felt personal. Lived in. Real. I stood near the entrance, unsure how far I was supposed to go. My shoes felt too loud against the quiet floor, every small movement suddenly noticeable. "You can sit," she said, walking past me. I turned slightly, watching her move deeper into the room. There was no rush in her steps, no urgency in her tone. It was calm, almost too calm. "I won't take much of your time," I added quickly, holding out the file as she approached again. She didn't take it immediately. Instead, she stopped just close enough that I could feel the shift in the air between us. A quiet second passed. Then another. "Work can wait," she said softly, finally reaching for the file, but her fingers brushed against mine in the process. It was brief. Accidental. At least, it should have been. But something about the way she didn't pull back right away made it linger longer than it needed to. Just enough to be noticed. Just enough to feel. I let go of the file, but not the awareness. Not the strange, unspoken shift settling between us. And in that moment, standing in her home instead of her office, I realized this wasn't going to be a simple delivery after all. Something had already changed. I just didn't know what yet. The door clicked shut behind me. It wasn't loud, but in the stillness of her house, it echoed just enough to make me aware of it. A quiet, final sound. Like something had been sealed the moment I stepped inside. I turned slightly, watching as she moved further into the room with the file in her hand. There was no urgency in her pace. No sign that she had called me here for something important or time-sensitive. If anything, she seemed in control of the silence. "Sit," she said again, softer this time, gesturing toward the couch. I obeyed without thinking too much about it, lowering myself onto the edge of the seat. My back stayed straight, hands resting together, like I was still sitting across from her desk at work. She didn't sit immediately. Instead, she stood nearby, flipping open the file. Her eyes scanned the pages, but something about the way she held them, loose, almost distracted, made it clear her attention wasn't fully there. A few seconds passed. Then she closed the file. "You always organize things like this?" she asked. Her tone was casual, but when I looked up, her eyes were already on me. Not just looking. Observing. "I try to," I replied. "It's easier that way." She hummed softly, stepping closer. Too close. Close enough that I could notice the faint shift of her breathing. Close enough that the space between us no longer felt neutral. She leaned slightly, angling the file so it was between us, her shoulder brushing lightly against my arm. It was subtle. So subtle it could have been accidental. But my body reacted before my mind could decide what it meant. A quiet tension settled under my skin. She murmured, turning a page even though she had already closed it. You pay attention to details. I have to, I said, my voice coming out a little quieter than I intended. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she stayed where she was. Her shoulder still near mine. Her presence steady. I became aware of everything all at once. The warmth of the room, the softness of the couch beneath me, the faint scent of her perfume drifting closer every time she moved, even slightly. Then she lowered the file. Slowly. And for a moment neither of us spoke. I felt it before I fully understood it, that shift. Her gaze. When I looked up again, it wasn't casual anymore. It lingered. Not in a way that felt inappropriate, but not entirely professional either. It was searching. Measuring. Like she was seeing something she hadn't allowed herself to notice before. I swallowed lightly, unsure whether to look away or hold her gaze. So I did either. I stayed still. And somehow, that stillness felt louder than anything I could have said. You're different outside the office, she said quietly. The words caught me off guard. What do you mean? A faint smile touched her lips. Not playful. Not teasing. Just knowing. You're less guarded, she said. Or maybe, more honest. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Because the truth was, I didn't feel less guarded. I felt more exposed. Especially under the way she was looking at me. Another pause settled between us. Longer this time. Heavier. And then, as if realizing something, or deciding something, she took a small step back. The distance returned. But the feeling didn't. Relax, she said gently, placing the file aside. You look like you're still at work. I let out a quiet breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But even as I tried to settle, to convince myself this was normal, it didn't feel like it anymore. Because something had already crossed the line. Not in words. Not in actions. But in the way she looked at me, and the way I couldn't stop noticing. I should get going. The words came out almost automatically. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was self-preservation. Or maybe it was just the only way I knew how to create distance from something I didn't fully understand yet. She didn't respond. I stood up from the couch, smoothing my hands over my shirt, trying to ground myself in something familiar, routine, movement, anything that felt normal. I'll see you tomorrow at the office, I added, glancing toward the door. Still nothing. For a second, I thought maybe she hadn't heard me. So I turned. And that's when it happened. Her fingers caught the front of my shirt, firm, sudden, and unmistakably intentional. Not rough. Not desperate. Just certain. The fabric tightened slightly as she pulled me back before I could take another step. The motion wasn't forceful enough to hurt, but it was strong enough to stop me completely. My breath hitched. Everything else, the room, the quiet, the passing seconds, fell away into something distant. All I could focus on was her. And the way she was standing so close now. Closer than before. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence without even touching her. Close enough that the faint rhythm of her breathing seemed to sync with the sudden, uneven pace of mine. I didn't move. I couldn't. Her hand remained on my shirt, fingers still curled lightly into the fabric, not tightening, not loosening. Just holding. Like she was waiting. Testing. My eyes lifted to meet hers. And for the first time since I had arrived, there was no ambiguity in her expression. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was intent. What's the rush? She asked softly. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was something beneath it. Something steady and unyielding. I just thought. I started, but the words didn't come together the way I wanted them to. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I thought. I didn't know what this moment meant, or why I wasn't stepping back. Her gaze didn't waver. Not even for a second. You always leave this quickly? She asked. I swallowed, my voice quieter now. When the work is done, yeah? A small pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, she stepped closer. The distance between us disappeared completely. I could feel the soft tension in the air shift into something heavier, something that pressed in from all sides without touching. Her grip on my shirt adjusted slightly, not tighter, but more deliberate. Like she was reminding me that she was still there. That this moment was real. Stay, she said. Just one word. No explanation. No justification. But it didn't feel like an order. It felt like something else entirely. Something quieter. Something that held weight not because of authority, but because of what it revealed. I could have stepped back. Her hold wasn't unbreakable. There was nothing physically stopping me. And yet, I didn't move. My body stayed where it was, caught between instinct and something deeper, something I didn't want to question too closely. My heart was beating faster now, not out of fear, but awareness. Of her. Of the space between us that no longer existed. Of the way her eyes searched mine, not demanding, but waiting. As if the next moment didn't belong to her. It belonged to me. And for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I let it happen. I stayed. I didn't pull away. Even now, I'm not sure if it was a decision, or something quieter than that. Something instinctive. The kind of pause that stretches just long enough to become an answer on its own. Her hand was still holding my shirt, but the tension in her fingers softened, just slightly. Not letting go. Just easing. As if she had already understood what my silence meant. I stayed. And somehow, that changed everything. The air between us shifted, not sharp anymore, not uncertain. It settled into something slower. Heavier in a different way. She watched me for a moment longer, her gaze steady, searching. Then, without a word, her hand moved, sliding from the fabric of my shirt down to my wrist. The touch was warm. Grounding. Not forceful, but guiding. Come, she said quietly. It wasn't a command in the way I expected. There was no edge to it, no pressure. Just a softness that made it harder to resist than anything stronger would have been. She led me back toward the couch. I followed. Not because I had to. But because something in me didn't want to break whatever this was. We sat, closer this time. Not by accident. Not by chance. Close enough that our knees nearly touched, the space between us reduced to something fragile, something noticeable with every small movement. She let go of my wrist slowly. But her hand didn't move far. It rested beside mine, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her skin without contact. Don't rush, she murmured. I exhaled quietly, my shoulders easing just a little, though the awareness didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same as before. This one felt intentional. Shared. I became aware of the smallest things, the soft sound of her breathing, the subtle shift of her posture as she leaned back slightly, the way her fingers moved just enough to brush against mine. A light touch. Barely there. But it lingered. And when I didn't pull away, it happened again. Not accidental. Not entirely. I turned my head slightly, looking at her. She was already looking at me. There was something different in her expression now. Less guarded. Less distant. As if the version of her I knew from the office had been set aside, just for this moment. You're quiet, she said softly. I'm trying to understand, I admitted. Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but something close. Understand what? I hesitated. Because I didn't know how to put it into words without breaking it. This, I said finally. You, me, this. She didn't answer right away. Instead, her hand shifted again, this time resting lightly over mine. The contact was gentle. Intentional. Her fingers didn't grip. Didn't hold. They just stayed. And somehow, that felt more significant than anything stronger would have. You don't have to understand everything immediately, she said, her voice quieter now. I glanced down at our hands for a second, then back at her. Her gaze didn't move. It held mine with a calm steadiness that made everything else feel distant. I just asked you to stay, she continued. And you did. There was no pride in her tone. No control. Just a quiet acknowledgement. I nodded slightly, my thumb shifting just enough beneath her hand to return the contact. Not fully, not boldly, but enough to be felt. Enough to be real. And in that moment, I realized something that settled deep in my chest. This wasn't about power. Not really. It wasn't about control or commands. It was about something she hadn't said out loud yet. Something she didn't know how to ask for, except like this. Through closeness. Through silence. Through the quiet way she didn't let me leave. And the even quieter way I chose not to. For a while, neither of us moved. Our hands remained where they were, hers resting lightly over mine, warm and steady. It wasn't a tight hold, not something meant to keep me there. If anything, it felt like the opposite, like she was allowing the moment to exist without forcing it. But she didn't pull away either. And neither did I. The silence between us stretched, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full, of things unsaid, of questions neither of us wanted to ask too soon. I glanced at her again. Up close like this, she didn't look like the woman everyone saw at work. The sharpness was still there, the quiet confidence, but there was something softer beneath it now. Something more human. Something tired. You're thinking too much, she said suddenly, her voice low but gentle. I let out a small breath, almost a quiet laugh. That obvious? A little, she replied. Her fingers shifted slightly over mine, not gripping, just adjusting, like she was grounding herself as much as I was. Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, her gaze drifted away. Not far. Just enough to break that constant, searching eye contact. I don't usually do this, she said. Her tone had changed. It was still calm, but there was something beneath it now. Something more fragile. Less controlled. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. I don't usually. She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. Let people see me like this. Her hand remained on mine, but her fingers stilled. Completely. At the office, she always seemed like she had everything handled. Every decision, every situation, clear, precise, managed. But right now, she didn't. And somehow, that felt more powerful than anything else. You don't seem like someone who struggles to be in control, I said quietly. Her lips curved faintly, but there was no real humor in it. That's because I don't let anyone see when I'm not. The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heavy. It was simple. Real. And it landed deeper because of that. She finally looked back at me, but this time, her gaze didn't feel like it was measuring or testing. It felt open. I'm always the one people rely on, she continued. At work. In life. I give instructions. I fix things. I make decisions. A small pause. And after a while, it gets quiet. I frowned slightly, not fully understanding. Quiet? She nodded, her eyes softening just a little. Not around me, she said. Inside. The words lingered. I felt them settle somewhere deeper than I expected. Because suddenly, everything about this moment made more sense. Why she hadn't rushed. Why she hadn't explained. Why she had just held on. You don't have to be like that all the time, I said, my voice quieter now. She studied me for a second, as if weighing the sincerity behind my words. Then her hand shifted again, this time not just resting, but pressing slightly, her fingers curling just enough to acknowledge the contact. That's easy to say, she murmured. Maybe, I admitted. But it doesn't make it less true. Another silence followed. Softer this time. She didn't look away again. Instead, she stayed there, present, still, letting the moment exist without pulling back into the version of herself she showed the world. And without thinking too much about it, I moved my hand slightly beneath hers, not to take control, not to change anything. Just enough to meet her halfway. Just enough to let her know she wasn't the only one holding on. Her fingers responded instantly. Not tighter, but certain. And in that quiet, fragile exchange, I realized this wasn't about blurred boundaries anymore. It was about something much deeper. A woman who had always been strong, finally allowing herself to be seen. And somehow, trusting me enough not to look away. The room seemed smaller now. Not physically, but in the way the air pressed around us, thick with tension and unspoken words. Every small sound, the soft hum of the heater, the faint tick of a clock, felt amplified. My chest tightened slightly as I realized I couldn't focus on anything but her presence. She shifted on the couch, leaning just enough that her knee brushed mine. It was accidental, I told myself. But every nerve in my body disagreed. The warmth of her leg against mine, subtle and fleeting, sent a quiet electricity coursing through me. I wanted to move, to adjust, but I didn't. I didn't want to break the fragile rhythm that had settled between us. Her fingers shifted slightly over mine, brushing my skin just enough to leave a trace of heat. She didn't speak, but her eyes, those piercing, quiet eyes, did all the talking. They searched mine with an intensity that made my thoughts scatter. Not demanding. Not instructing. Just searching. Like she was looking for something she couldn't put into words, and for some reason, she hoped I could see it for her. I swallowed hard, acutely aware of how close we were. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with the room's warmth. It was subtle, not overpowering, but it was enough to pull me further into this charged atmosphere. Every breath I took seemed louder, every glance more deliberate. "Are you comfortable?" she asked finally, her voice almost a whisper. It carried a softness I hadn't heard before, a vulnerability buried beneath her usual composure. "Yes," I said quickly, though the truth was complicated. Comfortable wasn't quite the right word. I was tense, aware, on edge, but in a way that was thrilling, in a way I couldn't quite name. Her gaze softened, and she leaned a fraction closer. I could feel her warmth radiating against me, faint but unmistakable. She adjusted my collar with deliberate slowness, her fingers brushing the skin near my neck before pulling back. That pause, the lingering touch, was enough to make my pulse spike, but she didn't comment on it, didn't apologize. She simply let it happen, letting the silence speak instead. I wanted to say something. Anything. But words felt heavy, too concrete, too permanent. Instead, I let my hand rest where it was, near hers, hoping she would understand the tension, the hesitation, the pull I felt toward her. And somehow she did. Because the next time our eyes met, there was an unspoken agreement, acknowledgement without confession, a quiet recognition that the air between us had shifted irreversibly. The edge of something more hung there, delicate and sharp. Neither of us moved closer, but neither did we pull away. Every subtle gesture, the brush of a hand, a slight shift in posture, a lingering glance, carried weight. It was unspoken desire, tempered with restraint, tempered with caution. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine possibilities. But reality intruded, boundaries, age, the office, what it all meant. And yet, even with all of that, I couldn't ignore what this moment had awakened, a silent longing, a pull neither of us could fully define, but both could feel. She leaned back slightly, just enough to let the tension breathe, but her eyes never left mine. That look, heavy with quiet questions and muted longing, lingered. I realized then that whatever this was, whatever this connection had become, it wasn't fleeting. It was something that would leave a mark, even if we never named it. And for the first time, I allowed myself to sit there and simply feel it, to acknowledge the unspoken desire, the edge of something more, without needing to act on it, without needing to define it, just letting it exist between us. The quiet stretched between us, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, full of all the moments we hadn't spoken aloud, all the touches and glances, all the pauses where something bigger had been silently acknowledged. I could feel it in my chest, a slow, steady pull that made me aware of everything: her, the room, the soft hum of the heater, the faint scent that had lingered since I'd arrived. She released my hand. Just barely. Her fingers slipped away, leaving the smallest gap between us, but the warmth didn't fade. The air between us still carried it, heavy and palpable. It was a subtle signal, gentle but deliberate. She was letting me go, physically, and yet she wasn't letting the connection dissolve. I really should go, I said, my voice low. Her gaze held mine. Calm. Certain. There was no pleading in it, no command. Just a quiet acknowledgement of the weight of this moment. You can't, she said softly. I swallowed. Part of me wanted to step away. To retreat into normalcy, into the life I knew. But the other part, the part that had been sitting here all evening, aware of every subtle brush of skin, every pause, every unspoken word, couldn't move. So I didn't. Instead, I moved slightly closer on my own, letting my hand hover near hers. A small gesture, intentional but restrained. Her eyes followed, and for a brief second, I thought she might pull away. But she didn't. She stayed still, letting me bridge the distance. I took her hand gently, not forcefully, not demanding anything, just holding it. Her fingers curved around mine instinctively, a quiet acceptance that didn't need words. That tiny connection was enough. It carried more weight than any declaration ever could. She gave a faint smile, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. A mix of relief, acknowledgement, and something softer, something fragile but real. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a declaration. But it was enough. We sat there for a moment longer, hand in hand, the world outside forgotten. The files, the office, the rules, all of it faded into irrelevance. Here, in this quiet, we had created something fleeting but undeniable. Something that belonged entirely to us. Finally, I exhaled, letting the tension leave my shoulders. I should go, I repeated, softer this time, but with a new understanding. She nodded slowly. I know. But thank you for staying, she said. Her voice carried the weight of everything we hadn't spoken aloud. Even if just for a little while. I squeezed her hand lightly before letting go. Not fully, but enough to signal that I was leaving, but the connection remained. I stepped back, straightened my shirt, and moved toward the door. At the threshold, I turned one last time. She was standing there, quiet, composed as always, but with that faint, almost imperceptible softness in her eyes. The kind of softness that told me this moment mattered to her as much as it mattered to me. I nodded once. Good night. Good night, she replied, her voice calm, steady, and yet carrying a subtle undercurrent of something more. I closed the door behind me, stepping into the cool evening air. My heartbeat was still racing, my mind still alive with everything that had happened inside. But I felt changed. Different. The connection we had shared would linger, unspoken but undeniable, shaping the way I moved, thought, and felt for days to come. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a promise. But it was real. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes, simply choosing to stay, and to let someone else stay with you, was the beginning of everything that mattered.